Ahora toca mirar hacia adelante, hacia el futuro. Ahí ya no encuentro el Móstoles Balompié. Este club no puede ser local. Debe convertirse en algo mundial, que represente una causa, que defienda la verdad. El fútbol, como bien sabéis, transmite como ningún otro deporte.
Welcome to the latest edition of Paul McLean Live here on Truth Frequency Radio. It's another Flat Earth Truth Tuesday, as I like to say, and I'm your host, Paul on the Plane. We are continuing tonight with a series of interviews I've conducted with professionals in the Flat Earth community and the empirical evidence and firsthand experience with these proofs that they have. I hope you enjoy the show. So, tonight, my guest is a gentleman who, for the sake of anonymity, we're going to call him Zach. He has a wealth of knowledge and experience in a particular field that, in my opinion, is just chock full of flat Earth evidence and downright proof that our world is flat and fixed. And that is air travel. So without further ado, Zach, welcome to the show. Very much appreciate you taking the time to visit with us and share with us some what I would, again, consider hard evidence that the world is not a oblate spheroid or whatever that is, rotating or orbiting.
Good evening, Paul. Thanks for having me on your show.
Very, very, very glad to have you here and to hear about some of your experience here and what you've learned in your many years of air travel. So let's start off by just establishing your credibility. Would you mind just taking a couple minutes and letting us know about your education, your experience? Obviously, you can leave out any specifics, but just in general, your experience and expertise, with this profession of yours.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Well, where do I start? Okay, I started flying. I got interested in aviation about 30 years ago, and 29 years ago I got my fixed-wing license, then commercial. Flew aeroplanes for about 8 years before switching over to helicopters, commercial helicopter flying in a number of countries. And then I had the opportunity to go back into aeroplane flying, fixed wing, gain my air transport pilot license, and had the privilege and the opportunity to fly for a very wealthy corporate client, and I was flying his Citation X as well as his Gulfstream G650 around the globe. Oh well, we used to call it a globe then, but now I realise it's no longer a globe. And I've basically been flying both helicopters and aeroplanes commercially, professionally for the last 29 years. And in 7, 8, 9 countries I've been flying commercially. And I hold an air transport pilot license for both helicopters and aeroplanes in 3 countries around the world. And what hit me once about 4 years ago was I was teaching my boss's son to fly, and I went back through the training notes that I was given 30 odd years ago to prepare and study for my theory exams. And those documents, when I opened them up, very clearly stated that for all intensive purposes, for aerodynamics, we assume that the Earth is both flat and non-rotating.
So 29 years of experience, both fixed wing and helicopter.
That's right.
Commercially, personally, etc. And I guess going back to your original training, obviously that maybe did not, that fact that you find in the instruction manuals, right, when you're day one, right, of starting to simulate what it's going to be like when you're actually, engaging in air travel as a pilot. From day one, you're to assume, as you're training, that the Earth is flat and non-rotating. But it didn't strike you 29 years ago, did it?
No, and from most of my working brothers and sisters in the fixed and rotary field, they don't register that part. The irony of that is that when we take this assumption from our training manuals, which says that the Earth is flat and non-rotating, there's no second manual that now covers, now how do we deal with that, with the Coriolis effect and 1,000 kilometre an hour spin, yada yada, all the nonsense that we've heard. There's no transition to the real world of a spinning globe. So we remain with the so-called assumption that the Earth is flat and non-rotating. And when I'm planning a flight from one side of Earth, from whether it be from Brisbane, Australia to New York in the States, I don't make any plans for the adjusting of the additional radius of the Earth, and when I'm flying at 35,000, 40,000 feet. And if you look on a ball, the straight line between Sydney to New York, we'd almost be, or Brisbane to New York, we'd almost be overflying Hawaii. And yet, ironically, when I punch in the coordinates and I put in a flight plan for that flight to New York, we fly over Alaska, which would entail a massive dogleg. And I want to fly the shortest distance possible. I've done many flights between Sydney and Perth back to Sydney, and it's approximately a 3,000 kilometre distance. Our Gulfstream flies at approximately 1,000 kilometres an hour, 960, 980 kilometres an hour. So it's a 3-hour flight. Now, if you were to calculate in the 8 inches per square mile that we're supposed to be having, it would roughly add around 900 kilometres to that sector. So...
Oh, I see what you mean. The extra distance, because you're not flying over a flat plane. Or
that's right.
Assuming, we're told we're not flying over a flat plane, so you've got more distance to go around a sphere.
That's correct.
But you don't plan for that in your flight plan.
Never have.
And the amount of fuel that you need, even adjusting for going into the wind or with the wind, and so those sort of things, which obviously are going to affect your fuel consumption or your mileage, right?
Absolutely. And we have the jet streams, so that flying in one direction is always slower than another direction, because the jet streams are pretty much the same speed and direction throughout the year. The speed changes somewhat. The jet streams come down and increase in certain parts of the year. However, they're always going at the same speed. In the same direction. So it's always slower to fly from east to west than it is from west to east. Nothing to do with the Coriolis effect. That's just the ground speed related to the prevailing winds. But the higher you would fly, you are adding additional radius to a ball if you were flying around a ball. And our Gulfstream only flies at around 1,000 kilometres an hour, so we can't fly fast enough to cover that distance in 3 hours.